Well, thank you, Vani, for that extremely kind introduction. I'm reminded of the saying that this would be something that my father would have been proud of, and my mother would be the only one who would believe it.
Don't we all have parents like that? You remember from my parents from the Bay Area days, but my dad now is 85, and he's still extremely independent. And if I could do half of what he does at 85, I would consider that a life well lived. Okay?
Actually, Vani, I do remember that. I do remember how your parents were a part of everything that you did, and I admired you for that. I think not many people take their parents, especially as they grow older, on their journeys. And I remember your first coming out party for what became Brightworks, and your parents were very much there. So I really applaud you for the love and respect and that you've shown for your parents and how you've taken them along with you on your journey. That is very special.
That's been a special part for me. But talking about your journey, when I moved here in 2006, most of our friends actually didn't believe when I say I'm going to move back to India. They thought it was some prank or I would come right back to Silicon Valley. But you have made this journey also now as chairman and CEO of KPMG coming back. So what inspired you to come back to India?
I was finishing up with the Obama administration. And what happened was on November 8th, as you know, a big event happened. Trump got elected president. And the very next day, actually, a couple of folks called me and said, look, we know you're not going to continue in the next administration. One of them happened to be a really nice board position in India. And I actually said, yes, I'll do that. Then a few weeks later, around the middle of December, the global chairman of KPMG, who happened to be a very good friend of mine, said, will you go out and take a look at KPMG India? Now, in my US government role, I had a global role. I was the lead official to promote US exports and investment into the US and to open markets for United States companies around the world. So I'd seen a lot of countries. I traveled to at least 35, if not more countries. And I saw that if I were to look at where was business opportunity the richest, it clearly was in India, followed by ASEAN and followed by Sub-Saharan Africa. So in terms of just the richness of opportunity, there's no doubt that India was top of the list. I don't think this is really appreciated enough in the West. Certainly in the United States, a lot of people don't really know about the opportunity in India. The second was I knew KPMG India, and I knew that we had extremely talented people. And that's the other part of the India story. The talent that you have in India is something that is quite special. As I said, I traveled to many, many countries in my US government role. And I can't think of too many countries that have the innate capacity for growth, the intellectual capacity that India has, whether it's in the business leaders of India, whether it's in the entrepreneurs like people here, or many of the political leaders. This is not always understood, that for a country to grow, an economy to grow, there's got to be that kind of capacity. It's okay to say, I want to grow, but, frankly, you go to Indonesia and you speak to the leaders there, and you can see that that capacity does not exist, the intellectual capacity to envision. Mr. Amitabh Kant, a brilliant leader. How many places can have an Amitabh Kant? Or you meet a Chandrababu Naidu, or Devendra Fadnavis. These are all people who are bright, motivated, they have a vision, they want to execute, and the democratic system is such that they are going to be held accountable if they don't actually deliver. So all of that, told me that India's got great opportunity, it's got great talent, and for me it would be intellectually extremely satisfying to be in an all-in job once again. That's why I came.
And Arun, beyond India, you have had an experience that few can even aspire for, from meeting leaders of global companies across the world, not just business leaders, but government leaders, and of course the time you spent serving in President Obama's administration. So out of curiosity that I'm sure we all have, what's some of the memorable meetings or anecdotes that you cherish?
Yeah, let me give you three. maybe I'll start with Prime Minister Modi. So Prime Minister Modi, he was elected in May 2014. I was in the US administration. To make a long story short, some of us on both sides worked very hard to change the trajectory of the US-India relationship. It had not been doing too well. It was really in the doldrums. People were indifferent to India and the US administration. In the Indian government, people were like, we can't deal with the US, we can't get to agree. But I think we did a lot of things on both sides to change that. But the meeting that I was really impressed by was when I hosted the Prime Minister to a roundtable in Silicon Valley. The government of India wanted him to meet with renewable energy CEOs. So we had, you name the company, they were around the table, like a dozen people around the table. And then each one, gave their points of view of how renewable energy, whether it was their biomass product or solar or whatever, could be applied to Indian conditions. So the Prime Minister, wrote notes. And at the end of it, he responded to each one of them with such specificity that, I was very impressed and they were blown away. I mean, the way he listened and the way he gave them very specific comments that they could take away and think about. And actually that comes from the fact that he'd been a chief minister, was deeply engaged in development. So he carries that mindset. So that's one I was very impressed by him. He also has a tremendous memory, so like a very good political leader. The second one I'd say I was very impressed by was the Prime Minister of Singapore, Prime Minister Lee. I know we have, from Singapore, we have somebody here from Singapore. Yes. I've got to say that he is one of the most impressive leaders I've met. He's somebody who's been trained for that position. He served in the army, he's well educated, he understands issues. And I recall one meeting where he and the US folks are talking to each other about trade. And I remember at that time, something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership was being put in place. 12 countries getting together for the Mutual Free Trade Agreement, very complex agreement. The way Prime Minister Lee could explain the US side was amazing. I mean, his understanding was so deep that he could articulate not just Singapore's position, but the US position very, very well. So very, very smart way. And of course, a great sense of humor, great grace about him. And I was new to the government, my first time in the US, in any government. So in the government, there's a certain protocol and a certain way things are done. So you go into a meeting, a bilateral meeting, it'll be like the senior person on one side will sit there and the other one will sit here, kind of like we're sitting here. On both sides, there'll be chairs and all the officials will be sitting pretty much by rank. And it's very formal. You come, take your place, pictures are taken, conversation begins. But I remember he came into one of these meetings, and by the side of the door, there was a Singapore legislator who was on a wheelchair, and you may probably know who she was. And he came, and seeing her, he just kneeled down and he took out his iPhone and took a picture of her, turned around and took a selfie with her. Just so natural and just so authentic. So the fact that it could be so authentic, so natural, and then conduct a conversation about business with such great depth, I thought was just amazing to me. And actually the third leader, whom I must say I quite enjoyed meeting, was Aung San Suu Kyi, who was when I first met her, she was the opposition leader in Burma. So we go to Naypyidaw. Naypyidaw is this new capital in Burma that there's nothing, there's just government buildings there and huge highways, quite empty. So we met her. She was then under duress because, she was in the opposition and the military leaders were putting a lot of stress on her. Anyway, we met her, but this is a very human aspect of it. So the US delegation led by the Secretary of Commerce, the US ambassador, myself, were there. So she turns to me and says, so you're from India, so which part of India are you from? So I said, I'm from Kerala. Oh, Kerala, my favorite place, I go there for vacation. And then she keeps on talking and she says, I'm a Dilli wala. And then we move into the main conference room and my boss, the Secretary of Commerce, she says, she really likes you, doesn't she? Because she was only talking to me, So there's a certain charm about her. And then I later met her. So I remember what I noticed about her was that she came to this room, and once she was in the conference room, she was very eloquent and very firm about what she wanted to see happen, what she wanted the US to do or not do, etc. But what I noticed about her was a little thing that she was wearing jasmine in her hair. She's very elegant, I mean, extremely elegant woman. And the jasmine was kind of wilting. And I remembered, here's this very elegant woman under a lot of pressure, and even the flowers and the flowers in her hair are wilting. So later, roll forward, about a year and a half later, she's the supreme leader in Burma. She's won with a big majority. She comes to Washington. She stays at Blair House, which is the president's guest house. So we meet her in Blair House. And she comes out wearing a lilac, Burmese dress and kind of lilac roses in her hair and just blooming in a different way. So just another memory of another leader. Of course, now she's under a lot of pressure and probably rightly so for what's happening in Burma.
With that vibrant journey across the world and now a majority of your time focused here in India, you meet a lot of leaders in India, both from big businesses and small businesses. So, the question, will the global conglomerates and tech giants that are pouring billions of dollars into India, will they win the race? Will there be room for, startups, not just to be built and sold to them, but to genuinely challenge them and compete, as well as, we heard Mr. Kant and Mr. Nilakani this morning, on their enthusiasm for the Indian digital economy. But when you think about that, in the context also of startups, where are long-term strategic bets? You get a bird's eye view of India in a way that very few people do. So love to have you share that.
So I think India is already an entrepreneurial success story. I think everybody says, where's the Google of India or where's the Alibaba of India? Well, I'm not sure that's exactly the right question because India has its own success stories. I mean, take Nandan's own company, Infosys. It was a startup by some professionals, not with any family money or anything, just $1,000 that they put together and started. I mean, that's a great example of successful Indian entrepreneurship. We seem to forget the fact that we have iconic successes. Take HDFC Bank, for example. Another one, Deepak Parekh and colleagues starts HDFC, first not as a bank, but later they become a bank. And their market cap, and if you add up the market caps of all the HDFC-related entities, it's one of the biggest groups in India. And it's all professional entrepreneurs started. Or take Kotak, Uday Kotak. So I think we do have, depending on the sector you look at. If you look at the financial sector, and I would point to an HDFC Bank as one of the most valued financial properties in the world in terms of market cap. So we have great successes. It may not come just the same way as we would see, we'd see in the West or in China, but I think India will find its own unique ways to build companies. The scale in India itself is big. I think more and more the Indian market itself is worth serving. You can see that many Indian companies, the large companies which had been looking globally, are beginning to tilt more and more towards India. They're seeing the opportunity and the returns and the reduced risk in India to make it as attractive, if not more attractive, than going elsewhere. So we'll see a bit more of a focus back in India. I personally believe that the market here is just amazing. I can tell you that I have not seen this kind of opportunity anywhere except during the dot-com days, which Vani, you knew well, in Silicon Valley. For that brief spell, it was just a fantastic amount of opportunity. But after that, I think this is the best set of opportunities anywhere. I don't think this is really realized by people. I don't know why, I don't know why my kids are not working in India, why they try to make out and, be entrepreneurs in San Francisco. They should be here.
Son is visiting you right now with your first grandchild, I know, so don't let him go back.
That's what I'm counting on my two colleagues who are experts in e-commerce to persuade him that this is the place to be.
When you talk about the dot-com bubble, there's a little story that, in fact, Arun, you might not know, though you were at KPMG at that time. I had sold RightWorks in March of 2000, so talk about timing. Not that I had any deep insight, but it was great timing. So it matters a lot to entrepreneurs sometimes to get timing right. And while there is no formula for it, I think some of that is just around value-driven. When I looked at how companies were being valued at that time, and we had a great offer to sell the business, it didn't make sense to me, the type of insane exuberance that existed. And so we managed to sell at the right time. But as it turned out, KPMG was the managing the transaction and also was the auditor for the company that was buying us. And one of my angel investors was Sridhar Iyengar. And so he had to sell, and he was feeling terrible, but he got to sell at the top of the market and probably made more money than the venture capitalists did who had invested. So timing is everything. And at Kalaari, we could talk about startups all day long. And I see the transformative force that they can bring to leapfrog. But Arun, you haven't, while we have talked about HDFC and Infosys and so forth, we haven't talked about the core startup engine that's fueled right now, and I would even say is on fire. If you go to any business school, if you go to any IIT, if you go to anywhere, people either want to work for a startup or they want to start a company. And what do you think that journey from an impact or from challenges might be for us to think ahead?
So I think first of all, just really encouraging to see that more people want to do startups and go to a big company. That's really encouraging. I think what needs to also happen is that the ecosystem has to mature. And I think I'm seeing it happening. The fact that we do have a number of venture capitalists with good experience who can provide the mentoring and the support. The fact that the ecosystem of legal and accounting firms, et cetera, coming up. The fact that there are many people available in the system who can be mentors and advisors. I think I can say huge change in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And back in end of the beginning of the 2000, 2005 timeframe, it was nowhere near where we are today. And the kinds of problems that people are trying to solve, again, it's just very special, very fascinating. So I'm extremely encouraged by that. Now, going out beyond the e-commerce scene as well, in the financial sector, I see a lot of interesting companies that seem to be starting up. Some of them have become big, whether it's a cooperative micro-lending firm or a lot of micro-lending enterprises. So I just see a lot of activity around the country. So it's just terribly exciting.
And you were an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley before you jumped ship to do other things in life, right? So, and from all those, what is your 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of advice you give young entrepreneurs?
I think the first thing, and maybe the first, second, and third thing is just focus. I find that focus is extremely important. And not just as an entrepreneur, even in anything you do, but especially in an entrepreneur, because you've really got to pick what you're going to do and really focus on it. There's so many distractions that come one's way, which is true in a big company. But in a big company, the risk of that, it's okay. The company isn't going to go under. But if in a small company, that focus is extremely important. So I think my main advice would be just a relentless sense of focus on what it is that you're trying to do and working hard to execute on it.
You had earlier talked a little bit about the US-India corridor and how that might continue to impact in different ways the next decade. And any other thoughts on that you could elaborate?
No, I think it's a very natural partnership, as well said. First of all, if you look at the fact that there's so many Indian Americans successful in the US, so many of them in every field of activity, the connections that there are, I think there's just a natural fit. The Indian market is just going to grow. It's going to be more and more attractive for US companies to be operating here. I think every major US company is already in India. So now we are looking at the SMS, the small and medium enterprises coming to India. So I think it's got its own natural trajectory. And I just hope that the governments don't bring in like we had a little customs duty hike recently that affects all imports into India. I'm not sure that's such a good thing because India can compete without that. It's important for India to export and also important to import.
So you moved from being an entrepreneur into many journeys, and we have several entrepreneurs here. I see Mukesh here, Ritesh here. They may move on to do a second company. They may move on to become investors. They may move on to serve in a civic sense, and so there are many roles. I'm sure each of them aspire to be in their journey beyond being an entrepreneur. So you've been a bureaucrat, you've been an executive, you've been a poet, you've been an entrepreneur, you've donned many roles. Do you have a favorite role?
I think I found that I've just enjoyed whatever role I've been in. So right now, my favorite role, I'm having a blast. Truly, I've been here 1 year in India. After 39 years elsewhere, I can tell you that the people I work with, the clients we work with, every day has been great. Every single day has been great. It's not been one day when I went back and said, oh, I'm missing the blue skies of California. Not one day.
So what do you miss about California?
My grandkids. I do miss something that's, yeah.
I understand that. I was going to ask you to do something personal. I know when Shashi Tharoor reviewed your book, Plain Truths, he called it a rich and rewarding collection. So do you have a favorite poem of yours that you want to share with us?
So since you gave me a heads up, I brought a book. So I think Vani said I'm a person of few words. My wife agrees with that, and she points to my very slim book as the example of my very few words. But I picked a poem that I thought this morning. I know there are people here from San Francisco, and as I mentioned, I'm from Kerala, so I've got a poem here that connects Kerala or Trivandrum, where I grew up, and San Francisco. It also connects two generations. It's called Generational Journeys. Driving before daybreak to San Francisco Airport, I am reminded of childhood journeys in Kerala. The taxi would arrive in pitch darkness from all of a mile away to take us to the railway station just 2 miles away. Panikar's taxi service is always punctual, my father would say. On the dot, he will arrive at 5 a.m. The driver, a wisp of a man, still half asleep, would sit seemingly stuck to the steering wheel. On this scenic highway, I hear my father's words, recall the trips I made with him to the railway station and then on the train. Slow journeys, 100 miles in 8 hours. Then I settled into a plane to New York City, just 5 hours across a continent to see my son. I am offered a chilled Bellini and a plate of cheese. But I think of tender coconut water and the slow train and my father's sweat-cooled arm.
And just to wrap up today's conversation and bring it to your current professional role, how do you see KPMG's role in the, you have a large role to play from large public enterprises in the country. But what's your, and you mentioned in Silicon Valley how there was an ecosystem, and I remember a funny story, actually, a friend of mine who was at EY at that time, he was offered to be an...
EY? Who's that?
Okay. And was offered a chance to be an auditor at an unknown company called Google, and he said, should I do that? And he said it was the best chance he took, right? And so, and like that, there are so many stories in India of how the larger, network ecosystem comes into the startup to support. In my own case, I remember actually meetings with Larry Sonsini, not for any legal advice, but for the vast network and perhaps insights that occasionally you could get, right? So that ecosystem somehow in that special place works in a virtuous cycle, right? So how do you see KPMG's role in startups in India?
I'd say the first thing that we do need to have that kind of ability, like a Larry Sonsini, to provide not just technical advice. I mean, you don't go to Larry Sonsini for technical legal advice. You went for his wisdom. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be able to provide. I think India, that's an area where I said the market is maturing, but we still do have a ways to go. We need to have a sprinkling of Larry Sonsinis and people like that who can give that real business advice. So we have to train our people to do that. But more specifically, I think we at KPMG, we should be working with companies, small, passionate companies that have great technology ideas, because our business is going to be completely changed. I can tell you over the last 1 year that I've been here, we've grown nicely, double digits, but our headcount has not. And we don't want our headcount to keep growing secularly with the growth rate. We want to grow very fast, but we've got to find smarter ways of service delivery. So companies that are doing artificial intelligence, robotics, process automation, data and analytics. I mean, data was mentioned today twice by both Nandan and by Amitabh. The Prime Minister, was speaking at Davos, within the first 2 minutes, he talked about data. I mean, it's really important. Data analytics for us is really important. So if we can get involved with passionate companies that have great ideas, we would love to work with them. Maybe we can take them to our clients. Maybe they can solve our problems for us. Maybe we can create things together. I just feel it's in KPMG in India, altogether we have 20,000 people here, which is about 10% of our global workforce. And I started by saying that we've got a very talented group. That same talent, we should be able to create solutions that we can use across KPMG globally. So we'd love to work with startups with great ideas in any of the areas that I mentioned.
So I have your permission to give your contact, Sridhar's contact to the startups that are here and beyond.
And Shalini is here, Sridhar is here. Please, we would love to. And I would personally love to.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vani.
It's a small token.
Oh, thank you.
Startups.
Great.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.